What's up, Jaguar fans? It's your boy UCF Jaguar reporting with GenJag.com, and 2017 free agency is coming to a wrap as all the top of the market free agents have been signed to new deals with new teams. Now, before I go into my draft coverage, we have to discuss what the Jaguars did during the 2017 free agency period. In this video, I'll discuss all the players from the 2016 roster that will no longer be with the team. I'll discuss the players that we decided to re-sign to new contracts, and I'll discuss the shiny new free agent set we brought in. Now, this video is going to be a lot longer than my normal videos, as I'm going to provide some analysis to every transaction that we decide to make. So since I'm going to be doing an analysis on all the transactions that we made, this video is going to be a lot longer than usual. So for that reason, I went ahead and provided this graphic. So if you want to know more about a particular player, you can go ahead and skip to it now. And you can also reference this in the description of the video. And you can see I just highlighted some players. If you want to know more about these transactions and get a more in-depth look at it, go to my channel because I provide a more immediate reaction and I go a lot more in-depth on it. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get into it. Once again, this is UCF Jaguar, reporting with GenJag.com. So I'm going to start this video and talk about the players that we decide to either cut or the players that we decide to let walk. And I'm going to start on the defensive side of the ball since that's what made the most noise during free agency. And we'll go to the defensive line trenches and talk about Jared Odrick first. Now, Jared Odrick came over from the Miami Dolphins in the 2015 free agent class. He was signed onto the team to play that big defensive end role that Red Bryan played in Gus Bradley's Seattle Seahawks defense. But unfortunately for the Jaguars, this was a free agent bust, as the only game that he really played lights out was a game that he was super motivated against his old team, the Miami Dolphins. Now, the word around the Jaguars media is that this guy just was not committed to his craft, and he was just too focused on what he was going to be doing in his life after football. So Odrick, adios. Now, the next guy we're going to talk about is the guy that actually replaced him this season when Odrick was not playing to the level they thought they should, and that's our man from the 2010 draft class, Tyson Alualu. Now, Tyson Alualu was one of the more controversial picks the Jaguars made because in 2010 he was way overdrafted, and also that was the year when Tim Tebow came out where millions of Jaguar fans were wanting them to draft Tebow. Now, while Tyson Alualu didn't play up to the level of his draft spot, he was a very solid player for the time that he actually was on the Jaguars. One of the best things about him is that he never got injured. He's literally never missed a game due to injury, and that's an awesome trait to have in a guy. But the thing about Tyson, he's just honestly just a very average player. He was pretty decent against the run, but he really wasn't all that great against the pass, and he wasn't really able to beat guys one-on-one. And when you draft somebody as high as you want him to be, you want the guy to be a really good pass rusher. So with that said, thanks for all you've done for the city of Jacksonville, Tyson Alualu. You've always been very interactive with the fans, and we all really appreciate that. So next up, we have nose tackle Roy Miller. Now, Roy Miller was actually a really good player for the time that he was on the Jaguars. He was an extremely good nose tackle. He was extremely stout against the run. And also, he was a leader of this team, and he always pumped the team up before games. But unfortunately for Roy Miller, he got injured in the middle of the year. And then this was an injury I was actually really worried about because he was part of the reason why we had such a great run defense, and I didn't really know what we were going to do without him. But then once Abry Jones stepped in there, he actually did just as good, if not a better job than him, because not only was he actually really good against the run, I actually thought he was better than Roy Miller when it comes to rushing the passer. And then now that we re-signed Abry Jones to a longer deal, we're going to go with the younger option, and Roy Miller's is coming back from an Achilles injury, and then that's a pretty nasty injury. It's going to take a longer time for him to recover, and he's not going to probably have that same push that he had before, especially since he's in his later part of his career. So thanks for being a great player for us in your 4 years on the team, Roy Miller. And next up, we have Sen'Derrick Marks. Sen'Derrick Marks was signed to the team in the very first free agency class of the Gus Bradley, Dave Caldwell regime. And it really stinks what happened with him because in 2013, he was probably the best player on a defense that really wasn't very good. But the next year in 2014, he really emerged, and everyone remembers when he had that sack against Tennessee, when he had the little money dance, but it was so unfortunate for him because he got injured at the very last game against Houston, and he had that ACL tear, and then I think since then he just wasn't the same player. Because the next year in 2015, the season was cut short. I think he missed like the first 5 or 6 games, and then just the rest of that season, he didn't really have the same push that he had the year before, just because he was fresh off an ACL tear and he was, just coming from rehabbing and whatnot. And then last year, as our defense got better, he kind of took a back seat on the defense, and this wasn't something that he was really happy about, and his production just was never the same as the year that he had in 2014. So it stinks because Sen'Derrick Marks is a really good guy, but I really hope he catches on somewhere, and I really hope a team enjoys what he has to offer. So next up, we're going to go into the defensive back group, and we're going to talk about Davon House. So it's kind of funny with Davon House because the Gus Bradley regime was always getting a lot of heat because they weren't disciplined and they weren't tough enough on their players. But even in the year 2015, where Davon House actually had a pretty decent year, he'd go onto the field and basically fart, and then Gus Bradley would yank him from the field. Davon House actually did have a pretty good 2015 year. He actually broke a franchise record in pass deflections. But, of course, everyone remembers that quarter he had against DeAndre Hopkins where he got absolutely smoked. But according to his words, he didn't do as well in 2016 because he thinks that he excels in press coverage, which is what they did a lot in 2015. But then in 2016, they switched their defense up a little bit, and then he was forced to play off coverage a little more and do a little more cover 3. And then that didn't fit his skill set as much, as he thinks he's a lot better of a press corner. So this is one of the more obvious cuts that they're going to make, and he actually signed back with his boys at Green Bay. So we're going to stick with the defensive back group and go to Prince Amukamara. Now, Prince Amukamara wasn't signed back to the team because we upgraded when we signed AJ Bouye. But while Prince was on the team, I thought he was a pretty solid player. I thought he was a pretty good cover player because you always saw him covering on guys, but I didn't think he was enough of a ball hawk to where he got pass deflections, because a lot of times when you look at him on receivers, he was right there next to the guy ready to make a play, but he just never got his hand on the ball, then just didn't get enough pass deflections for me. So we got AJ Bouye. He's a lot more of a ball hawk and definitely an upgrade at that position. So next up, we got Johnathon Cyprien. When Johnathon Cyprien was drafted in the second round of the 2013 draft, he was drafted to play the Cam Chancellor role of Gus Bradley's Seattle Seahawks defense. But unfortunately for the Jaguars, we didn't have that free safety in Earl Thomas that was sideline to sideline, so we had to have Cyprien play a lot more in coverage, which was just expose his weakness. He is such a coverage liability. I mean, I can close my eyes and see Colts games where Dwayne Allen is still running open. And now the Jaguars are just going to be playing more split safety and have him and Barry Church and Gibson play more interchangeable roles, which will probably make Gibson happy because at the end of the year he was complaining about how all he did was play free safety. But all in all, even though Cyprien had a pretty decent year last year playing in the box, we're not playing that defensive scheme anymore. So for that reason, Cyprien's out. So next we'll move to the offensive side of the ball, and we'll start with our boy from Michigan, D-Rob. So Denard Robinson was drafted in the 5th round of the 2013 draft class, and when they drafted him, the Jaguars positioned him playing the position of Dave Caldwell doesn't know the answer to that question. As you guys remember, they denoted him with the offensive weapon tag in his first preseason here, and I honestly think they originally envisioned him playing in the slot because I thought he was the perfect size and he was a good speed for that, and everyone knows that he's not big enough to be a running back. But I don't know if you guys remember, but his first year he was having weird nerve problems with his hand where he couldn't grip the ball, and it was making him fumble a lot. And I think that might have been the reason why he wasn't able to succeed at the slot position. But that's a speculation by me. I mean, the dude was not big enough to be a running back. Maybe he could be used as more of a gimmick player somewhere else, but this guy can only probably get 5 to 10 touches per game, if that. So next we'll stick with the same draft class. We'll move on to the left tackle, the number 2 pick in the 2013 draft class, our man Luke Joeckel. I thought Luke Joeckel was a very average player, but since he got drafted at number 2, he had an expectation to be a lot greater than he was. I was actually in favor of re-signing Luke Joeckel because I thought we could get him cheap. I thought we could maybe get him for $4 million for a 1-year deal, but the Seattle Seahawks wound up giving him $8 million for 1 year, so I didn't want to pay him that high. But I don't think he's going to make a good left tackle, but I do think he could potentially be a good guard. Because his thing was he's not very good in space, and when he gets beat in space, he dips his head a lot, and then once you dip your head, that's when the defensive end is able to just pretty much do everything with you because you pretty much lost all balance, all, position of your body. But I thought Luke Joeckel was pretty decent against the run, and with playing like a little left guard, playing with less space, I thought it'd just give him a lot less responsibility and it'd make him play a little bit better. But in his 4-year career with the Jaguars, 2 of them were cut very short because of different injuries. But the 2 years, the 2014 and 2015 year, 2015 I thought he played somewhat decent, but we all remember the very last game against the Texans where he just looked awful. And then before that, he didn't really give up that many sacks that year. But whenever Joeckel did give up sacks, it was always it would be so embarrassing. They'd push him on his back and pancake him, and it just usually looked embarrassing. So it gave us a perception of him being really, really bad. But for a number 2 overall pick, you want to play better than that. You want to be a cornerstone. And for that reason, Luke Joeckel, you a bust, homie. The door's right there. Now, it may have sounded like I was a Luke Joeckel supporter in that, but I thought we were maybe going to give him a little bit like a Tyson Alualu deal where we give him a little bit of money to stay on the team just since he really doesn't have much of a market for him. But next up, we're going to go to the other left tackle and talk about Kelvin Beachum, who went on to join the Jets. Kelvin Beachum was a pretty good pass blocker, but his run blocking suffered because he was just recovering from an ACL tear that he was actually made a missed training camp in a little bit of the preseason. But I thought if we gave his knee an offseason recover, then it would have been able to come back stronger, and then he would have been able to build off his ability to pass block and then really, really help him out in the run blocking game. But I guess the Jaguars thought that the knee wasn't going to recover well, so they wound up not picking up his option. But they wound up getting Branden Albert, who I think is an upgrade. But it's kind of weird just because they didn't know that player was going to be there because they had no idea that he was going to be released by the Dolphins. But we'll get into that later in the video. Next up, we got one of the biggest free agent busts in Jacksonville Jaguar history, and that's our man Julius Thomas. Julius Thomas is brought to the Jaguars to be the move tight end and to be a real red zone threat for Bortles to be able to pass to. Now, tight ends are successful in passing games because they draw favorable matchups because they demand linebackers to cover them due to their ability to run block. Julius Thomas was so bad at run blocking that he didn't even demand a linebacker to cover him. They would literally put nickel cornerbacks on him. And then Julius Thomas just wasn't very fast, and he created virtually no separation from these guys, and it just made him both a running liability and a passing game liability. Maybe now that he's going back with Adam Gase over at the Dolphins, they can use him better than we did, but just if you're a liability like that in the running game and you're not that fast, you're big, you're slow, you're just not going to be valuable to our team. Last year, I honestly thought both Sterling and Koyak were better than Julius Thomas, but we're definitely going to be, I think, drafting a tight end in the top 4 rounds in next year's draft. But that includes all the key players that were on the Jaguars in 2016 that will no longer be with the team next year. Some highlights / disappointments that you can note is how bad the 2015 free agency class is. Just a bunch of overpaid people that didn't come in with the right attitude that just pretty much came here for the money. Luke Joeckel, Johnathon Cyprien, and Denard Robinson were the only players that were even on the team last year from our 2013 draft class. And now with those guys gone, we officially have nobody left on our team from the 2013 draft class. The draft is where you want to find your cornerstone players, and the draft is where you want to be signing players after 4 years instead of finding players from other teams. But instead of re-signing our draft class, we were left signing other players with bigger contracts, so nobody is left from this 2013 draft class, and what a big swing and a miss by Dave Caldwell in his very first draft as GM. So that concludes all the players that we either released or let walk during the offseason. So now that we went over that, we're going to go into the players that we decided to re-sign from the team last year. And we'll start out this video on a high note and talk about us re-signing nose tackle / defensive tackle Abry Jones. While the 2013 draft class was a complete bust, Dave Caldwell wound up striking gold in college free agency by signing this guy out of Georgia named Abry Jones. In the last 4 years, I thought Abry Jones is one of the most underrated players on the team. Now, he plays a position where it's pretty hard to get noticed, but because on the defense, on his position, you're not really rushing the passer as much. As nose tackle, you're more of a run blocker and a run stopper. But Abry Jones has always been able to put out solid plays since he's been on the Jaguars. And really the last 2 years has done really well. I've really started to notice him. And then this, like I said earlier, after Roy Miller got injured, I was really worried about what we were going to do at that spot. But Abry Jones went in and filled in for him. And he played even better than Roy Miller, and I was even really impressed with what he was able to do when it comes to rushing the passer. And I always love hearing stories about undrafted players hitting it big like this. You know, you have guys like Alan Hearns and, you know, Barry Church, AJ Bouye, those guys that we signed, that they're just really hard workers. They didn't come in as these big name prospects like these other guys, so they pretty much worked where no team gave them a chance in the draft to where all of a sudden they're getting paid, you know what I mean? So it's really cool for him and good for Abry Jones. So we're going to go ahead and take a 180 with this, and I guess I'm going to have to talk about this, and let's just go ahead and talk about Chad Henne. So Jaguars decided to re-sign Henne, but they signed him to a contract that's pretty team-friendly if they do decide to cut him. Now I really hope Henne isn't on the roster next year. What needs to happen is if Bortles winds up sucking again like he did last year, we need to start figuring out what else we got and plug in either Brandon Allen or whatever rookie we decide to get in the draft. Just we already know what we have in Chad Henne. He's not a good quarterback, and I honestly don't even think he gives us a better chance to win than one of these backup quarterbacks. I mean, you see Chad Henne playing the preseason and he's awful, and I just don't want to go back to seeing passes get tipped at the defensive line by him. I'm sorry, Chad, but Bortles is getting older. He doesn't need a mentor anymore. He needs to spread his wings. You guys need to just let go. But with that said, let's go into the O-line a little bit and discuss some of the players that we decided to re-sign there. So I'm going to do these guys in a group. We re-signed Patrick Omameh, who played a lot of left guard. We re-signed Josh Wells, who primarily plays tackle. And we also re-signed Tyler Shatley, who's a backup center, but he's also got a lot of work in at both guard positions. But one of the scary things is that if we were to line up today, Patrick Omameh would be our starting left guard, just because the Jaguars didn't go after any of these high-priced guards or really that many high-priced interior linemen at all. But I guess from here, all eyes are on the draft when it comes to what we're going to be doing at our interior offensive line. But with that said, let's go ahead and go into the wide receiving core as we re-sign our backup chocolate and vanilla swirl with Arrelious, Benn, and Brian Walters. It's kind of funny the sequence of these signings, because Arrelious Benn was re-signed a couple weeks before free agency period actually began. And then a lot of Jaguar fans were kind of annoyed by it and not really agreeing with it, because the Brian Walters is actually a huge fan favorite and everybody was wondering why the heck we didn't re-sign him. But like I said at the time, I figured we were going to re-sign Walters, but it looked like what Walter was doing, he re-signed the day of free agency. So he was probably just going to test the free agent market to see what they had to offer, and when there really wasn't much out there for him, he just decided to re-sign with the Jaguars with an offer that was already on the table. But what I really like about Walters is he's one of those guys that is really able to find a way to get open. I kind of compare him to Chris Hogan up in New England, where these guys are able to find the soft spots and zones, is able to turn around and be there for the quarterback. I forget which game it was. It was one of the last two games, but I remember there was one drive where it was just literally Bortles to Walters, and he just kept finding ways to get open. But these guys will mainly be competing for special team spots. They offer you two different things when it comes to the special teams game. Arrelious Benn is more of a gunner and more of can play kick return, kickoff, and stuff like that, and go tackle the dudes. And then Walters is able to go back there and be somebody who you can rely on to catch the ball in a fair catch, and someone who's just got steady hands. But we'll see what goes on with the number 5 and 6 spots on the wide receiving core. We'll see if they bring in anybody from the draft to compete with them, but we may have the same wide receivers as last year when it comes to A-Rob, Hearns, Marquise Lee, Rashad Green, Lee, and then Walters. Sorry, not Lee, I mean Benn. But those are the players that the Jaguars decided to re-sign. Not much big headlines there. I mean, you'd like them to be re-signing guys from our 2013 draft class, but the only guy you re-signed was the guy you got undrafted out of that class in Abry Jones. But, you know, just not much headline-worthy stuff here. Now, Jacksonville is once again being praised nationally as being the winners of this free agency class. But I'm not going to be leading that kind of propaganda because us as Jaguar fans know that we all pretty much drank the Kool-Aid last year, and the Kool-Aid that we thought was a sweet cherry flavored turned out to be sour green apple once the regular season came about. But before I go into the big names that we signed to our team, I want to remind you guys that if you guys want a more in-depth coverage about these transactions, these signings that we made, please check out my channel because I have immediate reaction to all that, and I'll be talking about it a lot more than I will in this video. But with that said, let's go ahead and talk about my boy AJ Bouye, who's also a UCF Jaguar. AJ Bouye reaching this point in his career is a real testament to how hard he's worked since he's gotten in the league. AJ Bouye was not a highly drafted prospect. Actually, he was completely undrafted coming out of UCF. But last year, due to some injuries, he finally got his chance to start. And when he was on the Texans, fans from around the area were sitting there kind of waiting for him to have a bad game. But every single game, he piled up his resume, and then by the end of the year, he literally didn't really have any bad games. AJ Bouye has crazy good ball skills, and he has a crazy ability to be able to literally just stare at the cornerback while guarding his receiver and just logging his eyes on a quarterback, reading him, and making plays on a ball that way. But this signing also makes so much sense because you have two lockdown corners now, and then one of your lockdown cornerbacks in Jalen Ramsey is going to be so cheap for the next 4 years. So with this duo of cornerbacks, it'll really give the defensive line a chance to get more sacks because if they can hold off these guys in coverage for another half second, that just gives the defensive line another half second to get to the quarterback. And we're a team that's so desperate to get more turnovers, so I really think this signing is key, and it's such a big move to get a premier position or get a premier cornerback in AJ Bouye to come over here and pair him up with Jalen Ramsey to make one of the best cornerback duos in the NFL. So let's take it down to the trenches and talk about the signing of defensive end Calais Campbell from the Arizona Cardinals. Now the Calais Campbell signing is huge because it gives us another big body along that defensive line, and this dude is huge. He's 6'8". He's built like a freaking refrigerator. I mean, if you think Malik Jackson is big, this guy is even bigger than him. Like, I can't even imagine what our defensive line is going to look like with those two next to each other. But Calais Campbell has been in the NFL. This is going to be his 9th year in the NFL, and a lot of people are worried about maybe him having a lack of production now that he's getting a lot older. But if we can get 2 more good years out of this guy, then that's really all that we can really ask for. I think that he can get us a good couple years just because last year he had 8 sacks for the Arizona Cardinals, and he's over 30 years old. But this guy's been dominating the NFC for so long. He's been on Arizona Cardinals his whole career, but one of the reasons why he came to Jacksonville is because he really wanted to pair up with Tom Coughlin. I really like this guy's attitude about the signing. He's really optimistic about being able to come over here and take some players under his wing and really just get this defense to play to its full potential. I mean, he got 8 sacks last year. If we get like 5 or 6 sacks out of this guy and then get some more production out of Dante Fowler and have Yannick Ngakoue play like he did last year, then we're gonna have a pretty solid defensive unit, especially if we draft another edge rusher in the draft. But I like those 2 free agent signings. Those are 2 really high market home run guys we got. And then the next guy we're going to talk about is Barry Church, the strong safety that we got from the Dallas Cowboys. Now, Barry Church wasn't the best free agent available at his position like Calais Campbell or AJ Bouye were, but he is a solid signing for what we're going to be trying to ask out of him. Barry Church is a much better coverage safety than Cyprien is, and that's why we decided to get him over Cyprien, because we're going to be doing a lot more split safety looks, and Deshaun Gibson and Barry Church are going to be kind of alternating between free safety and strong safety, I guess, depending on whatever defensive package they have or whatever matchup they have going on. Barry Church wasn't necessarily the best free agent available at the position. I mean, Tony Jefferson was a little better than him, and obviously Eric Berry's top of the league. But it's a good signing for what you're looking for. You can't get all the most expensive guys, so Barry Churchy is one of the better strong safeties available, so it's definitely a good pick with him. And he's also another one of those undrafted guys that's really worked his way up here. And since he re-signed to Dallas on a 4-year deal 4 years ago, and he started every game since then. He's only missed like 4, 5, or 6 games or something like that, but only a handful of games. But he's been able to be healthy pretty much all the time, and he's been able to be a really productive player for them. And Dallas Cowboy fans will tell you that they will miss him. So that said, Barry Church is a good player for what we're looking for. We may look to upgrade in next year's draft, but he'll be definitely the starter this season. So with all that said, let's go ahead and move on to some of the smaller tier defensive guys we got. We signed Audie Cole, an inside linebacker from Minnesota. We signed Larentee McCray, who's an outside linebacker who played with Buffalo. And we signed Stefan Charles, who's a defensive tackle out of Arizona. Now, I'm not really going to break these guys down too much just because these guys are all bubble players who's just going to be fighting to make the 53. And if they do make the 53, it's not going to have much of the impact on the defensive or offensive side. They're just going to be more special teams players. So that's our defensive free agency class. And with that said, let's go ahead and move on to the offensive side. And that side is highlighted by a trade we got when we traded away Julius Thomas and received Branden Albert, who's going to be our starting left tackle next year. Now, it's kind of a unique situation how we actually acquired Branden Albert, because Branden Albert was told by his coaches and the GM that he was going to be released. And then he went on to tell his agent about how this is going down. And then his agent went on to tell the media about this, and then once the Jaguars heard light of this, they immediately called the Dolphins and says, "Wait, hold on, you might not want to release him yet. We may be able to have a deal we can work out with you guys to get him." Now, he wasn't technically traded for Julius Thomas. They basically trade each other and alternated 7th round picks, so it wasn't necessarily a straight up trade, but it basically was. But the signing mainly happened because I guess the Jaguars didn't have much confidence in Beachum being able to recover, and maybe they don't think Beachum, even if he's at 100%, will be as good as Branden Albert. But Branden Albert's an older guy. I believe he'll be 31 or 32 when the season kicks off. But he didn't necessarily have a very good year last year, but in the last 4 or 5 years, he's been to 2 Pro Bowls, and he's actually a really good run blocker. So hopefully adding him to the team will help our ability to run a little better in the future. But one of the worries about Branden Albert is that he's been a little dinged up the last couple years. He's taken some injuries, and it's obviously one of the best abilities availability. And it's really tough to be missing your offensive lineman, especially on a team like the Jaguars, because it's not going to be looking like we're going to have much depth at the O-line. But those are my quick thoughts on the Branden Albert situation. And that pretty much concludes the big free agent signings that we made. And with that, I'll segue into some of the kind of smaller tier offensive linemen that we decided to grab. One of those guys is Earl Watford, another guy that we grabbed from Arizona. He's a right tackle, and he pretty much has only played when there's injury. He actually wound up starting 10 games last year at right tackle, but it's just due to injury, and there's a reason why they didn't re-sign him. And we also signed Greg Van Roten, who's been in Canadian Football League for a little bit. Yeah, I'm not going to break those guys down too much just for the sake of the length of this video, but these guys are just going to be competing for roster spots, and we'll see what happens when the season starts and what our offensive line is looking like after the draft. So that will finally conclude this free agency video. If you look at the free agency class, there's 2 main takeaways from it. One of the first takeaways is that we're really trying to go a lot older than we have in the past. Usually Dave Caldwell has tried to sign players that are in their mid-20s and coming off their rookie contracts. But this year we actually went after some guys around the 30s, and it's a real testament to how we're trying to become an older and a more veteran team, and just how really just in a win-now mode. Another thing you take away from it is the concern at the offensive line, especially at the interior O-line at the left guard spot, where we really didn't upgrade at all in free agency. If we were to line up and play today, we'd have Omameh starting at left guard, and obviously AJ Cann at right, and Brandon Leonard at center. But we got to do something to upgrade this interior offensive line. So I definitely think we're going to be addressing that in the draft. But with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching my video. It took me a long time to make, so I'd really appreciate it if you liked it to give me a thumbs up and maybe subscribe to my channel. And I also want to remind you to check out genjag.com for all your latest Jaguar news. And also be sure to follow them on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And definitely make genjag.com your best place for Jaguar news. So with all that said, my channel is officially going into draft mode. This video will conclude free agency for me, and now we're have all attention on the draft for the next month and a half. This is your boy UCF Jaguar reporting with genjag.com. I'll see you guys next time.